The views and opinions expressed by guests on the TWBC podcast are solely those of the guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of, nor constitute an endorsement by the host, TWBC, or the advertisers.
National championships, Confederation championships, World championships, major professional events. For over 3 decades, he has been there for many of the sport's greatest moments. And now he brings you even closer to the movers and shakers in the world of high-echelon tournament water skiing. From the founder and creator of the Water Ski Broadcasting Company comes the TWBC Podcast. And now here's your host, Tony Lightfoot.
Well, greetings once again, water ski fans. I am the aforementioned Tony Lightfoot. This is the TWBC podcast. Welcome to this very latest episode. And I'm pleased to have the pleasure of this guy's company, one of the greatest overall skiers at this time. From Canada, his name is Dorien Llewellyn. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Tony.
Not a problem, not a problem. We're at the King of Darkness, primarily a jump event, but you do participate in the tricks event as well. And as I mentioned right up front, a triple threat, so to speak. So this season, being the World season, is going to be especially important to you in that regard, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. It feels like everything's leading up to the Worlds in every single event. So tournaments like this, it's a really good intro to get myself to focus on jump for a little bit, but then obviously afterwards going right back to thinking about all 3 events and continuing to push towards the Worlds for sure.
Now, obviously, there's an individual element to the World Championships of which you're going to be very much a part of. I mean, you'll be competing in overall against the likes of Martine Coleman and Joel Poland and the like. But there's also a team component in the mix as well. You're going to be part of Team Canada. Now the team competition is going to have a little bit of a wrench thrown into it because not many countries are going to be able to field their full team of skiers. But yet, I believe the United States and Canada could well come in with a full-strength team, and you're going to be very much a part of that.
Oh, yeah. Being a part of the Canadian national team is always such a treat for me. I grew up playing hockey, and with my dad being from Canada, just remember cheering for Canada at the Olympics and all that stuff. And obviously, I have my connections to the U.S. I live here. I live in Florida, and I love watching sports here too, and also Austria, especially the snow sports. But there was always a special place in my heart for Canada, and so being able to compete on the Canadian team with my dad, with all the other people like Ryan Dodd, Whitney McClintock, just legends in the sport, has really been a dream come true. But yeah, like you said, this year and last year has been obviously really different. We are blessed to have a lot of the pro skiers here, and a lot of the Canadians, a lot of the Americans obviously are in the U.S. and in Florida especially. Yeah, like I said, the pro guys, I'd say 90% of the pro water ski community does live in Florida, so that is a good start for getting a lot of people at the Worlds that should obviously be there. I know there's definitely some countries that are going to struggle. Australia, right off the bat, Jacinta and Joel Howley couldn't even make it to the Masters, and I know they're sitting at home with their fingers crossed that they'll be able to come and defend their titles because those two are so deserving of being world champions and being out there to push it again. And I know having them at tournaments just pushes everybody else to be better. So, it's tough, and I'm still hoping that in the next couple months with all the vaccines and stuff we can get it figured out. But yeah, it's unfortunate, and I've recognized in the last year how fortunate I am to have an international family, with my dad being Canadian and my mom being Austrian. It never really hit me, like traveling, how big a deal that was to have those connections. But in the last year, being able to go to Austria and see my family there and enjoy time there, it's such a blessing. Yeah.
I mean, do you think that with the that with the current situation with the pandemic and the restrictions that that countries are putting on their citizens to travel to and from their countries, you know, I mean, there are some that are allowing international travel and some, as you say, Australia, that don't. But I mean, let's play devil's advocate here a little bit. I mean, do you believe that these World Championships coming up in Central Florida are worthy of an asterisk to be put next to them, you know, and making it less of a World Championship situation? I mean, let's be honest here.
You know, I don't think, from the events that I'm going for and the people that I know are going to be there, I think this is actually going to be even harder. Like you mentioned already, you know, you got Martin Coleman in overall, you got Joel, who just set the new world overall record, and the two of us have been going at it just on the ranking list for the last year. Obviously, you can never count out Adam Siddlemeyer. I know he's taken a bit of a break in the last couple of weeks and like hasn't skied as much with having 2 kids now, but you can never count him out as a multiple-time world champion and always a perennial threat for overall. So yeah, I think the overall field is the strongest it's, I think, ever has been, with probably 8 guys or even the top 10 guys that could all take the title. In terms of tricks, I mean, you saw it for the qualifyings for the Masters. Everybody was tricking over 11,000 points to get into the Masters, and then at the Masters you had to trick over 11 to make the finals. And that, yeah, in terms of jump, I mean, all the guys are here. Everybody's going really far, and I think for what I can see, I would definitely, if anything, I'd put an asterisk next to, we're going to be at Jack's at one of the best sites in the world, and I think the scores are going to be absolutely off the chain. So, you know, that's my personal take on it. But obviously, if Jacinta isn't able to make it in jump, I would never say put an asterisk next to it, but you always have to take that into account of, you know, how much has she skied and how is she going to be here when she's here? And if she's even 80%, obviously we all know what that means with her having won 30-plus pro events in a row. And that's nothing against any of the other girls, but, you know, I definitely hope that she comes and that Joel and everybody else makes it for the event.
Very good answer indeed, and certainly you'll be all primed and ready for that event. The overall, which is your primary category in the World Championships. Now, I've asked this of at least a couple of people that I've done a podcast with. Do you honestly think that overall gets the respect that it should deserve?
I like you said, I'm obviously a big overall guy. Always growing up, knew I was going to do all 3 events, and just loved seeing how far I could push myself and still pushing myself in each event. So, you know, when I come out to tournaments like this, I mean, today I wasn't all that excited with my 215 jump and watching Jack and Freddie go 225 and 234. I mean, I was fuming on the shore. Like, I know those guys are obviously of the top category in the world in jump, and they're specialists in jump, and obviously Freddie is Freddie. But yeah, I just want to go out there and compete in each event. I'd never put that asterisk next to, well, I'm an overall skier. And I think that's the beauty of overall, is that you have that opportunity to push yourself in each event and see the true limits of what you can do. In terms of, you know, the respect that it deserves, I think it's been lost in the last 10-ish years. I know my dad's era of skiing was the golden age of water skiing with the Coors Light Tour and everything. And I think the number of overall skiers at the time, I mean, you have, you know, Carl Roberge,
Sammy Duvall.
Yeah, Patrice, my dad.
Even Mike Hazelwood back in the day.
Yeah. Yeah, and then obviously the generation after with guys like Jimmy Seamers. I mean, those guys were all so fixated on being the best overall skier because they knew that being the best all-around skier meant that was the king title. And you even have guys like Ryan Dodd. I mean, I've talked to Ryan, just jumping with him a lot. He's one of the guys I consider my coaches, and you know, his original dream was to become overall world champion. But the more he grew up and the more he saw the direction that the sport was going with more individual events and one-off tournaments, he knew that it wasn't sustainable, at least for him. And you know, I'm blessed to have the support not only of my family, but you know, my sponsors like Red Bull, to keep me in a position where I can push in all those events. And I do think it's making a comeback. I think in the last couple of years, last year when I set the pending overall record, I had a lot of people that came up to me and were telling me how cool it was, and to be able to go out and I went 220 plus, so I went 223 and I ran one at 41 and tricked 11,000 points. So they said how amazing it was that an overall skier could do that, and how I was bringing overall back, which I didn't feel like I was bringing it back, but to, like you said, to many people it was eye-opening. And this year, with what Joel's done, obviously that's just adding on top of everything that we're doing.
All right. Obviously, what you do in the overall event counts for a lot. I mean, you're one of the top overall skiers in the world, and you focus upon the World Championship. But there are other events, so to speak. I mean, the Pan American Games should start to come into your view within about the next season or so. I think the next one's going to be in like Santiago de Chile. I think you competed in the last one in Lima. I mean, how much do you gain exposure-wise for skiing for Canada in the Pan American Games? Because, I mean, in this part of the world, the United States, I mean, they could care less about the Pan American Games so far as TV. But in Canada, it's on TSN and all that kind of stuff. So you must really benefit from that.
Yeah, for sure. The Pan Am Games, first of all, is such a cool event. Going into the opening ceremonies and seeing, I think in Peru, we were in the National Soccer Stadium, and it was full. And I'd never been in front of that many people before. And in addition, when we tricked, I finished second in tricks, and Natalia Kuglieva won in the women's. And for her to be, I think she was the first just athlete in general that from Peru that had ever won back-to-back gold medals. And I've never seen that many cameras before at a podium shot. Wow. So that was really cool. So just in general, the Pan Am Games is something that I think anybody that lives in the Pan Am region should shoot for. It's an amazing event. And yeah, in terms of exposure, for sure. Not only with my family legacy being a big part of the games, my dad was the winningest Canadian athlete of all time in Canada until the games in Peru, and at which point Whitney took over. And I think my dad had 14 medals and Whitney has 15 now. Wow. I might be wrong. Don't quote me on that one.
Okay.
But yeah, so obviously there's a huge history in Canada for water skiing, and especially at the games and the World Championships. And they do value that. At the games in Peru, the chief of the Canadian Olympic Association,
Chef de Mission.
Exactly. Yeah, your pronunciation is probably going to be better than mine on that one, so I let you take that. But yeah, he was there, and all his number twos were all there watching us ski, and they came for the overall final, which was also a really cool aspect of that event, having an overall final where even after the first 2 days of the tournament, I think I was leading both days and went to the finals and could have went from first to sixth on the next day. But yeah, they watched us ski that day, and I was fortunate enough to come home with the gold medal, and they were all super excited. And like you said, TSN was there and played all the clips. And so, yeah, it's a great experience and also great exposure for the sport as well.
Okay, overall final. I wasn't going to touch upon that, but thank you for bringing that up, because the last time there was an overall final so far as our sport was concerned, the World Championships, I think was about 2003, and ever since then the scores taken from the first and second rounds count towards your overall total and determine who the world overall champion. So let me present this to you. How would you rather have the world overall champion be crowned, by that method or by having a separate overall final where the top three from the first round will go into like a final shootout?
Oh man, I'm so conflicted about this question. It's a question that we've been asking ourselves a lot recently, not only with the Worlds, but we've had more overall tournaments in the past couple of years. And even, with my family's tournament in Austria, we're doing an overall event this year as well as last year. And each year we've asked ourselves that question of what's better. And, from a standpoint of having an overall final, it's definitely better for the crowd, for everybody watching, to go back to zero with no protected scores. And, you got to go out there and you got to lay it down. That's obviously the most exciting. I mean, it's what we do in almost every other event. You know, in King of Darkness now, tomorrow we go into the finals, no scores protected, you go for it, and whoever comes out on top wins. And then if I play devil's advocate, you know, does giving people 2 rounds, if you make the finals, does that give you the guy that's truly the best in terms of overall, in terms of consistency? Yeah, like I said, I'm super conflicted about this.
It just depends upon the situation. I mean, if you made it through to the overall finals and you're in first place, and you end up dropping all the way down to third. Of course, you're not going to be an advocate for that. But I mean, it's
and you know it's something that we've talked about as well in terms of the recognition of the event of overall, instead of just saying, you know, we're going to the Worlds and going to compete in 3 events. Like I obviously, and a lot of the other overall guys, we focus on each event individually, but we are always cognizant of the fact that there is an overall event. So, you know, I've heard from the Canadian Olympic Association at one point that they were saying, you know, well, the reason why we don't give funding for overall specifically is because it's quote unquote a paper event. But I can tell you 100% when guys go to the Worlds, it is not a paper event. We know exactly what everybody's doing in overall, and we know exactly what we need to win overall. So having an overall final would take that element out of other people's minds. I don't think it changes as much in the mentality of the skier, except for the fact that your strategy has to change. So I guess I haven't answered the question very well. We can use this to kind of open the forum for more people, and
absolutely,
other people can basically try to come in and convince me as to what's right, because like I said, I'm still struggling to figure out the answer.
All right then, and what I love about this interview, well, Dorien, what you can confirm to me is I have absolutely no script in front of me. There's nothing, no sheet of paper, no pen, nothing.
No, it's all off the cuff.
Okay, it's all off the cuff. And the one thing that you mentioned in that answer, and I'm glad you brought it up, was funding. Because obviously skiers from Canada get a stipend or something like that. I'm not too sure. I mean, I haven't dealt into the financials. Why would I? But I mean, it kind of explain how the Canadian teams are funded from their Olympic Association or what have you, and how that kind of differs a little bit from what you've heard elsewhere.
Yeah, we're super fortunate in Canada. It wasn't a factor when I switched countries. I started skiing for Austria when I was a junior, and I knew that I could make all the open teams when I was really young and got to ski at the Worlds when I was 13, but always knew that I wanted to switch to Canada. For me, it was more of a personal feeling of that's what I wanted. The funding wasn't, when I was 18, wasn't at the forefront of my mind. But now that I have switched, I can see why my parents at least factored that in. Canada's awesome for us. We get treated super well. We get somewhat the Olympic treatment in terms of the carding that we're referring to with our funding. So yeah, you go to the World Championships, and if you finish in the top 8, then you're automatically in contention for getting an Olympic card. And then in terms of where everybody finishes, we do have a limited amount of cards. So if 8 people finish, or I think it's 6 actually right now, or 7. If 7 people finish first place, sorry, that's not even possible, but if 7 people finish on the podium and then the next person is not on the podium, unfortunately that person that didn't make the podium would not get a card. So, you know, that is a little bit of the downside of that funding. Is at some points in the tournament, it can feel like you're competing against your own team, which, like you alluded to before, you know, water skiing is an individual event, and we travel there as a team. But yeah, you never want to sit there and have to wish that somebody on your team doesn't ski well so that you can get funding. So, you know, and we're all such good friends that never has really come into play. Nobody's ever, you know, gotten mad at somebody else. What can you do if somebody skis better than you? You just have to accept it. But yeah, I can't thank Canada, the Canadian Association, enough for the fact that they are that behind us in terms of the sport. And obviously you see it in our team. I mean, we're able to come down here to Florida, and we're able to compete every single year for a podium, if not a gold medal. And yeah, just the amount of talent that's come out of Canada for a place that is cold most of the year. It definitely has to do with not only the people that we have in our own association, but also the funding that we get. It allows us to keep pushing.
A nation that prides itself in ice hockey and curling excels at tournament water skiing. Who knew?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like I said before, Whitney and my dad, two winningest people in terms of Pan Am game history. So, yeah, there's definitely a culture in Canada for water skiing, especially, going to the cabins in the summers and being with the family and stuff. And that's just something that I hope that we can tap into, that viewer base, because there are so many people in the world that watch skiing or that have skied, but that they just don't understand the pro side of it. And if we can just figure out how to tap into that, we have millions and millions of people that would be genuinely interested in the sport.
I'm sure that your father, Jarrett, makes no pains to remind you how accomplished he was out there on the water. But just to round off this podcast, what would be the dream ending to a season for you?
Oh, for sure. World Championship, gold medal, world record. Team medal, obviously, is something that comes into play. But, I want to win the overall World Championships. And, just kind of stamp, like you said, stamp my own name into that Llewellyn legacy. And I just saw, a month ago that IWSF came out with the athlete of the quarter century and opened up the website, and boom, there's my dad's face next to athlete of the quarter century. So just a little reminder of how amazing he was in this sport, and how fortunate I am to have grown up in the family that I have, with not only my dad being a world champ, but my mom as well. And so that's always been a goal of mine, is to win the worlds and overall. And definitely not going to handicap myself in terms of any event. I want to push myself and jump and see what I can do there, and tricks as well. And you never know in slalom. So like I said, I tend to push myself in each event, and whatever happens in the end.
All right, so you've just listened to Dorien Llewellyn. Thank you very much for participating in this podcast, and we wish you the very best of luck going forwards, not only in this King of Darkness tournament, but also for the remaining tournaments on your schedule. Yeah,
thanks for letting me talk with you a little bit.
Not a problem. And you've been listening to me, Tony Lightfoot, this latest episode of the TWBC podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time, I'm going to say ciao for now.
Thank you for listening to the TWBC podcast. Be sure to check out our website at waterskibroadcasting.com. Links to our presence on major social media platforms can be found there, as well as updates to our webcast and this podcast. Duplication or rebroadcasting of this broadcast without written consent of TWBC is prohibited. Subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform, and be sure to join us next time for the next edition of the TWBC podcast.